Hello, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barrett.
And I'm a socially distant Chaz Licciardello.
There you go. Tonight, American politics and society turned on its head by a virus.
We're going to have the very latest on the COVID-19 pandemic in America.
We'll get some expert opinion on how well governments and citizens are responding.
And we'll be looking at what might be the final showdown between Biden and Bernie. But first,
the coronavirus pandemic, or as the president called it yesterday, the
Chinese virus,
is causing unprecedented disruption in the United States. Residents of major cities like New York are being warned of a possible citywide lockdown within days. The San Francisco Bay Area is already under an order to shelter in place. That's been enforced since yesterday. The US ban on foreign arrivals from Europe triggered a surge of Americans returning home over the weekend. Airports, which hadn't rostered additional staff to test incoming passengers, were quickly overwhelmed.
Tonight, the nation's biggest airports thrown into chaos as enhanced coronavirus screenings cause massive delays through customs. At Chicago's O'Hare, thousands of people returning to the U.S. herded on escalators going nowhere.
The mayor of Chicago begged for help.
We need more screeners here at O'Hare, and they need them at other airports across the country.
They sure did, and there were similar scenes at Dallas-Fort Worth where travellers were packed together for up to 7 hours.
just to be clear, what you're seeing there are thousands of people who just came back from Europe, a COVID hotspot, crammed together like sardines for hours. I cannot think of a more effective way to spread the virus. Mind you, I can understand why America's trying to crack down on people entering the country. The COVID-19 deaths in mainland China, they might have levelled off, but the deaths from everywhere else are just getting started. So caution makes sense. You just need to get enough staff at the airports to streamline the process. Just look how people queue for stuff in Italy. 2 metres away from each other. That is what serious distancing looks like.
That's the most organised the Italians have ever been. 2 weeks ago, of course, President Trump was still trying to reassure Americans and the stock market that concerns over the virus were being overblown.
and this is their new hoax. But, you know, we did something that's been pretty amazing. We're 15 people in this massive country, and because of the fact that we went early, we could have had a lot more than that.
This week came a very definite change of tone. No more talk of hoaxes or that it will magically disappear in April. The president announced a dramatic intervention.
My administration is recommending that all Americans, including the young and healthy, work to engage in schooling from home when possible, avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts.
Yeah, Trump also this week declared a national emergency, which frees up over $40 billion from the Disaster Relief Fund for workers, tests, supplies and vaccinations.
The president promised what he called a big celebration once the virus has been defeated, but the president also says the advice he's getting is that is going to be months away.
So is this the new normal until the height of the summer?
We'll see what happens, but they think August, could be July, could be longer than that.
Some real talk from Trump there, and it's welcome too, because until now his optimism has probably had a detrimental effect on America's readiness. When asked whether they were worried members of their family could catch COVID-19, and they should be worried, 68% of Democrats said that they were worried, but only 40% of Republicans said they were worried. And 80% of Democrats thought the worst of the virus was yet to come, and it is, compared to, again, 40% of Republicans. And that's a concern because unworried people don't take precautions. Like the governor of Oklahoma, for example, only a few days ago Instagrammed about the great time he was having at a restaurant, noting that it's packed tonight. It makes you wonder what his son was trying to say in that photo. Yep, that's probably it.
Yes, indeed. Well, in other major developments this week, the US stock market continued to suffer the effects of the pandemic and fears the American economy is inevitably heading into recession. On Monday, the Dow plunged 2,997 points. That is the worst points drop in history, erasing the gains of the last 3 years. That came despite a decision on Sunday by the US Federal Reserve to slash interest rates by a full 1 point to near zero and injecting huge amounts of money into the American economy. There was a bond buyback, snapping up at least $500 billion worth of Treasury securities and at least $200 billion in mortgage-backed debt.
The reason for all that activity is this. Goldman Sachs is now projecting zero growth for this quarter and a lot less than that for next quarter, although it should pick up after that. Still, pretty hard terrain coming for America, John.
Yeah, and not just America. Meanwhile, the only Republican senator to vote to impeach President Trump just last month, Mitt Romney, has come up with a plan and it's gaining traction. Give every American adult $1,000 to help tide them over, plus some measures for small business grants and student loan relief. Well, Senator Romney says he's pushing the measures as a part of a Senate plan to put in an additional set of relief measures. The White House has given in principle support for just such a payment. Earlier today, the Dow bounced back 1,000 points as it took in the extent of what is shaping up to be $1 trillion worth of relief measures. The House passed a bill on the weekend temporarily paying sick and family medical leave. It bolstered funding for health, food security, unemployment insurance and providing free coronavirus testing. The Senate is due to vote on that soon. They were maybe going to vote for it yesterday, but for some reason, Mitch McConnell decided to take a 3-day weekend. Chaz, we don't even know what that's about.
Oh dear. Although apparently that bill has a pandemic-sized hole in it, because the paid leave requirements you referred to do not apply to companies with more than 500 workers, even though those big companies employ over half the nation's workers. And the paid leave requirements can also be exempted by small businesses who hire another 26% of the workers. So overall, 80% of workers still might miss out on paid leave. But at least one thing is finally happening, and that is testing. Over 50,000 tests have now been conducted, with the Mayo Clinic rolling out a fast test and Roche rolling out an even faster test. Sure, it took 2 months to happen, but I don't think the president's taking that too hard.
No, I don't take responsibility at all, because we were given a set of circumstances and we were given rules, regulations and specifications from a different time.
Someone then asked Trump if he at least took responsibility for the biosecurity unit that was closed down in his National Security Council.
Well, I just think it's a nasty question. And when you say me, I didn't do it. We have a group of people. I could ask perhaps my administration, but I could perhaps ask Tony about that, because I don't know anything about it. I mean,
don't look at him, Donald. He's not the president. And by the way,
there's always a tweet.
Back to 2013, when Trump tweeted, "Leadership. Whatever happens, you're responsible." That is a good tweet to remember. Although Trump's got to be doing something right, because even in the days after his much criticised address to the nation last week, 59% of the people who watched that speech approved of Trump's handling of COVID-19, including 30% of Democrats. COVID-19 may have claimed over 100 victims in America, but at least so far, one of those victims is not Trump. By the way, talking about Trump, that China virus thing from before, that's partly because right now China's trying to convince people that the virus actually came from America. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Li Jingzhao has been tweeting that the American army may have brought the epidemic to Wuhan. He says that America owes us an explanation, and he's also been tweeting out supposed evidence that the virus originated in America. Although he's not the only one with a crazy origin theory.
The North Korean leader promised a Christmas present for America back in December. Could it be they got together with China and this is that present? I don't know.
Spot on, Jerry. You don't know. Another Fox favourite, Sheriff Clark, tweeted that George Soros was involved somewhere. Let's hope that now Trump's taken the virus seriously, we at least might be done with that kind of thing.
A group of leading US health policy experts have joined together to call for Americans to stay at home now. Among them is Dr. Lanhee Chen, who, as you might recall, was Mitt Romney's top domestic advisor in 2012. And he joins us from his home in the San Francisco area. Lanhee, welcome back to Planet America.
Thank you, John.
So you're right there. It's one of the many ground zeros in the United States now. What's it like to be in this shelter-in-home mode?
Well, I think the benefit to it is that people, and whether it's the citizens or the policymakers here in the area, are really taking this whole thing seriously. I don't think that was entirely the case, maybe up until about 10 days ago. And the restrictions have gotten progressively more aggressive over the last 10 days, leading now to this order that was issued last night that everybody living in the entire Bay Area, basically, San Francisco all the way down to the southern tip of Santa Clara County, which extends almost down to the Monterey Peninsula, is required to stay at home unless you need to go out to get some essential goods.
Lanhee, I have to ask you this. Do you have enough toilet paper? I hear you can't get enough.
Well, fortunately, I stockpiled before all of this happened, so we have plenty of paper towels, toilet paper, all the goods that people could want. But it is really something, Chaz. I mean, you go into the supermarket, and I would say pretty much every other day they don't have any. They don't have any toilet paper. They don't have any paper towels. It is quite something to see.
We have seen, Lanhee, in the last few days, on the weekend, certainly a lot of Americans were going out to crowded bars, partying on, going to restaurants. Even senior political figures were saying, live your life, enjoy. How rapidly is that changing, and are the messages getting through?
Well, I think for the vast majority of politicians, it has changed. I think they are conveying the right message now. Now, there's still a few that have some aberrant statements. You also have these very troubling pictures coming from Clearwater Beach, which is near Tampa in Florida, where you see thousands of spring break tourists out on the beach, hanging out, having fun. So there are still some parts of the country where I don't know that the message has quite gotten through to the citizenry yet, but slowly but surely, I think the messaging is getting out there. And, obviously the president changing tone yesterday was very helpful in that regard, particularly for those who were skeptical of what this virus would do.
You know what a lockdown is like now. We're hearing from the president in that press conference yesterday that this might last for 5 months. Do you think America is capable of doing this for 5 months?
Certainly for a few weeks. I can see it for a few months. There will come a point, though, at which I think it's going to be difficult for people to continue doing this. Now, look, maybe one thing is people get used to living their lives in this way. They get used to working from home. They get used to the kids being out from school. But it's a very challenging thing to do in a free society. If you compare how the United States has tried to handle this versus how China's tried to handle it, it is the case that a Chinese-style crackdown, true lockdown, probably would not have worked and would not have been amenable to people in the United States. So America's going to do it America's way, and we'll see how that goes.
Lanhee, in times of stress, uncertainty, anxiety, it's easy to get angry at people, including people that stockpile toilet paper. A lot of people are getting angry with President Trump's mixed messaging, downplaying at first seemingly for the benefit of the markets rather than the benefit of the people. Objectively, and as a Republican yourself, how good or bad has the White House response been?
I would say it's been mixed. Initially, they were behind the ball, no question about it. They were not, for example, testing is one area that I'm sure you've heard a lot about. The lack of access to testing supplies, to being able to turn a test around quickly. I think that is changing now. By the end of the week, test capacity here in the U.S. will not be an issue. Now, the turnaround time is still a little bit long. We're still seeing 24 to 48-hour turnaround time for the results of tests. But, testing is just one example. The U.S. was very early on in travel restrictions, but you can argue those travel restrictions may not have gone far enough. We weren't doing enough to take temperatures for inbound travelers, even those who were United States citizens. And I think that things have gotten a lot better. But we did, unfortunately, lose a few weeks of time there with a sluggish response.
Lanhee Chen, so great to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was the 11th and probably the last debate of the 2020 Democratic primary season, and there has never been anything quite like it. For a start, there was no handshake.
Yeah, and they made the candidates stand 6 feet apart for their own safety. But then they didn't give us stuff about the moderators.
They're expendable.
Nevertheless, the very first question, of course, was about coronavirus.
What do you say to the American people who are confronting this new reality?
So all Biden had to do was be presidential. Be calm, don't do anything that might worry people.
First of all, my heart goes out to those who have already lost so much.
Okay, well, he lasted longer than I thought he would.
Well, Biden did come armed with a plan. He outlined exactly what he would do to respond to this pandemic as president, including having the military come in and set up temporary hospitals, although in typical Joe Biden fashion, he managed to mangle all of his viruses.
And we can do that. We did that. We've been through this before with the coronavirus. We've been through this before. We've been through this before with dealing with the viruses that the N1H15, as well as what happened in Africa. We provided these hospitals dealing with these great pandemics.
Bernie Sanders was less specific on the pandemic, pivoting quickly to argue Medicare for all is the answer.
We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. We're spending so much money, and yet we are not even prepared for this pandemic.
But going back to that very familiar hymn sheet, left an opening for Joe Biden to argue that he was the pragmatic candidate looking for real solutions, while Bernie's healthcare revolution would never happen.
The senator talks about his Medicare for all. He still hasn't told you how he's going to ever get it passed. He hasn't told you how, in fact, there's any possibility of that happening. He hadn't told you how much it's going to cost. He hadn't tell you how it's going to apply. It doesn't kick in for 4 years even after it passes. We want a revolution. Let's act now.
And with the one-on-one format, even with 6 feet in between them, there were some squabbles.
Whoa. Everything was on the table. All right, you're right. You just said it, including, in your judgment, cuts to Social Security and veterans.
In order to get the kinds of changes we need on other things related.
Joe, then
but we did not cut it.
I know, because people like me helped stop that. But Joe, you just contradicted yourself.
Then Biden tried to get one over Sanders, but Sanders called his bluff and it did not quite work out.
I think in the past, Joe, if I'm not mistaken, you condemned super PACs. Is that correct?
You get rid of the 9 super PACs you have?
I don't have 9 super. I don't have any super PACs.
You want me to list them?
No. Yeah, you go ahead and list them.
Come on, give me a break.
List them, Joe. By the way, Open Secrets lists 5 outside groups that support Bernie Sanders, but combined, they've only spent $770,000, whereas Biden's super PAC has spent almost $7 million.
Although, to be fair, that's because Joe's campaign has no money at all. But Biden did come prepared with a bit of an ace up his sleeve, an unprecedented announcement from a presidential frontrunner that became the big news item from the entire debate. Take a look.
And I commit that I will, in fact, I'll pick a woman to be vice president. There are a number of women who are qualified to be president tomorrow. I would pick a woman to be my vice president.
So then Bernie was asked if he too would commit to having a female vice president, and he was a little more equivocal.
In all likelihood, I will. For me, it's not just nominating a woman. It is making sure that we have a progressive women, and there are progressive women out there. So my very strong tendency is to move in that direction.
And that, Chaz, for me, pretty much summed up the entire debate. Joe Biden kept it simple, telling viewers what he would do in this pandemic, what he will do as a candidate and as president. Bernie still making arguments for those big picture reforms, but fudging questions on specifics, even down to whether he'd have a female running mate or not.
Yeah, I thought Biden really had one major task at that debate, and that was to reach out to Sanders supporters. He's got the nominations sewn up already, so he needs to unify the party, and he came ready to do just that. He committed that day to making public college free for those earning less than $125,000 and to also adopt Elizabeth Warren's bankruptcy plan. But as you say, John, before long, the two of them were bickering like something out of Grumpy Old Men. So I don't think in the end that debate really did much good for either of them.
Out of context, at the COVID-19 debate, Bernie explained what happened when he told the kids at the skate park he was going to do a 180 kickflip.
People were saying, Bernie, that's a radical idea.
Biden responded to accusations that his answers don't contain enough detail.
No.
Senator Sanders?
Sanders hit back at Biden's claim that cats cannot ride Roombas.
Okay, all that I would say to the American people, go to YouTube. It's all over the place.
And Biden claimed that the Beatles stole his 1968 solo album to make Abbey Road.
That's a very different record than Joe's.
That is not a different record than mine.
That is a totally different record than yours.
And that was Out of Context at the COVID-19 debate.
A number of presidential primaries have been postponed over coronavirus fears. Louisiana pushing its April 4 primary to June 20th. Georgia, which was due to vote next week, has moved to May 19. Kentucky's May 19 primary is now on June 23. The Democratic Party in Puerto Rico has asked for their primary to be put off at least until the end of April. And then yesterday, Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine backed a court action to delay that state's primary, which was on today. The judge threw out the case at the last minute, saying it is just too late. Then the state's health chief ordered the polls not to open just hours before voting was due to start. Although Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis vowed their primary would go ahead today, saying there's no need to panic. But there were significant fears over turnout, poll volunteers as well as voters staying away despite the precautions.
Those measures include masks for workers, hand sanitizers and disinfecting sprays and wipes. The machines will be periodically scrubbed down too.
Heading into today's three remaining primaries, Joe Biden had opened up a 23-point lead over Sanders in the average of national polls, up an extraordinary 40 points in a month. Sanders has picked up just 6 points since those 5 other Democrats dropped out of the race. Today's biggest prize was Florida, and it was not expected to be close, with polls putting Biden 40 points ahead. And so it was. It was called for the former VP as soon as the voting stopped. Joe Biden was also comfortably ahead in Illinois. It was called very early as well. That just left the state of Arizona, and again, pretty easy win for Joe Biden. The delegates will ultimately take a bit longer to tally up, but Biden's lead of 150 before today has blown out by at least another 100. So the coronavirus is certainly adding to pressure on Senator Bernie Sanders to drop out of the race. After more than a year on the campaign trail, though, it's a tough call for any candidate to make. It was perhaps that renowned political scientist, Professor Kenneth Rogers, who said it best.
You got to know when to hold 'em. Know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, and know when to run.
But knowing when it's time for a presidential candidate to walk away or run isn't so simple. In 2004, the last time Democrats were running against an incumbent Republican president, Massachusetts Senator John Kerry saw off rivals including Howard Dean and General Wesley Clark.
We must beat George W. Bush.
Senator John Edwards was Kerry's last serious rival, trailing by almost 500 delegates heading into Super Tuesday. Kerry swept 9 of 10 states. Edwards finally dropped out when he was more than 1,000 behind. He was later picked by Kerry to be his running mate as a reward for not turning negative in the campaign.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
In 2008, Hillary Clinton went into the primaries as favourite, but Barack Obama scored a stunning victory in first-to-vote Iowa and maintained a small but significant delegate lead from then on in. Clinton faced a lot of pressure to end her campaign.
We all remember Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in June in California. I don't understand it.
Historically, fair point, but not cool to imply your opponent could be shot, Hillary.
Clinton, who's still campaigning for the Democratic presidential nomination, says she doesn't understand why there's such a rush to end her fight with frontrunner Senator Barack Obama.
The two duelled it out for months, Obama ahead, but not so far ahead that Clinton didn't hold out hopes of a comeback in March. That looked like a good strategy when a 5-year-old tape of Obama's former pastor was unearthed, where Jeremiah Wright blamed America for the 9/11 attacks.
No, not God bless America, God damn America, that's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America.
The Illinois senator now finds himself in a swirl of controversy, trying to diffuse growing concerns over his relationship with Wright.
Obama condemned Wright and his campaign recovered, but Clinton stayed in the contest until the final primaries in early June, when she was just 127 delegates behind. Neither of them had a majority, so it was the party's superdelegates that put Obama over the top. 8 years later, Hillary Clinton was again the favourite, and this time she was the frontrunner against Senator Bernie Sanders. Clinton already had the public backing of hundreds of superdelegates, much to the annoyance of Sanders and his supporters, but she also maintained a significant lead in elected pledged delegates, leading by 186 after Super Tuesday. 2 weeks later, after major states like Florida, Illinois and Ohio had voted, Clinton had extended her lead to over 250. Bernie, though, wasn't going anywhere. After the New York primary in mid-April, Clinton's delegate lead had been cut back to under 200.
Bernie Sanders resisting mounting pressure to drop out after that crushing defeat in New York.
He too stayed in the race until the final primaries in June. By then, Clinton was more than 300 pledged delegates ahead of Bernie, but still short of a majority, so she needed those superdelegates to put her over the top. And it was his irritation with those superdelegates that in part explains why Bernie stayed in so long last time. He wanted to win as many delegates as he could so he could have votes to change the party rules at the convention, which he did. At the end of the day, if it is a close race like 2008 or 2016, there are lots of reasons to stay in the contest all the way. Like Hillary indelicately said, anything can happen. And as for the frontrunner, Professor Rogers has some useful advice too.
You need to count your money when you're sitting at the table. There'll be time enough to count when the deal is done.
Big, beautiful world. So you might have noticed lately that everyone is getting kind of old, like the top 4 contenders for the Democrat nomination. No, they're older than that. Older. Exactly. And then there's the president and the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House. She's actually turning 80 this week. Congrats, Nancy. Here's a cake with 1 million candles on it for you. Even I am getting old, but it doesn't end there. The entire Congress is ageing. The current Senate has the oldest average age ever. And the current House was only just nudged out by the previous House. Still very old. Only in Congress today could an 86-year-old guy be called young. But then again, the whole workforce is getting older. Between 2000 and 2017, those under 55 years old had a net increase of 0 jobs. All the net increase in employment, we are talking 17 million extra jobs, was amongst those aged 55 and older. And this has had a dramatic effect on the age distribution of the workforce. The share of workers over 55 in the labour force has almost doubled in 20 years. It's about a quarter of the workforce now. So old people are staying involved and also they're staying alive. The share of the population that's over 65 is on its way up, and that process is accelerating. In fact, it's been projected that by 2035, people over 65 years old will outnumber people under 18 for the first time in America's history. And by 2050, right there, there'll be about 40% as many senior citizens as 18 to 64s. So old people are not only running America, but increasingly they are America. And they have even more political clout than you'd expect because they vote more as well. Almost half of the voters in 2016 had turned 50. The median voter there was about 10 years older than the median person in the country. And the less important the office, the more old people dominate the vote. In local elections, for instance, the median age of voters, 57 years old. Senior citizens are 15 times more likely to vote than 18 to 34s are in local elections. So what is the result of all this political power that old people have? Well, this is the amount of money the federal government has spent on children per child over the last few decades, as well as state and local spending on education, all combined there, okay? This is how much the federal government has spent on old people per old person. That there is mostly Social Security and Medicare. We're talking, as of 2015, only 2% of GDP being spent on children versus 9% of GDP being spent on old people. Well, maybe old people need it because they're poor. Nah, old people's poverty rates have actually fallen below everyone else's poverty rates over the last few decades, especially children's. And the median net worth of young families has dropped $4,000 over the last 25 years, but the median net worth of old families has actually risen $80,000. That's a 17% drop for the young and a 55% gain for the elderly. So the elderly are doing pretty well for themselves out of the government. And when it comes to issues like climate change, where elderly people care less than everyone else, well, good luck. So, in summary, America is a country run by old people, selected by old people, that works for old people, is increasingly made up of old people. The only question is, how much further can this go?
Big, beautiful world.
And that is all the time we have for another trip to Planet America, but we will be back, Chaz, God willing, at the same time next week.
Yes, and you can join us for a fireside chat on Friday on the ABC News channel, iView, YouTube and Facebook.
Bye-bye.